This is Writing Lessons, and I'm your host, Silas House. In each episode of Writing Lessons, we look at a different topic about creative writing. Today, we're talking about characterization. Our guest for this episode is David Arnold, the New York Times and USA Today best-selling author of Mosquitoland, The Electric Kingdom, Kids of Appetite, The Strange Fascinations of Noah Hypnotic, and most recently, I Loved You in Another Life. He has won the Southern Book Prize and the Great Lakes Book Award, among other honors. His books have been translated into over a dozen languages. David Arnold lives in Lexington, Kentucky, with his wife and son. So, David, the main reason I wanted you to come on the show is because I love your characters so much. They are like real people to me, and they really stick with me. As I'm reading the book, I'm witnessing you create the character, and then when I finish the book, they stay with me. I think that's one of the best things about writing, about books. And I mean, when I think of my favorite books, I always think of my favorite characters. I can't really separate the two. So, what's the most important? How do you do that? What's the most important element of creating a character for you?
Well, first of all, thank you. That means I can't think of a higher honor, actually, because I'm a character first reader.
Mm-hmm.
So being complimented for character is the highest honor in terms of, writing. And yeah, I mean, it's interesting that, when you said we were going to talk about characters, I was like, well, this episode, this discussion would be completely different if we'd had it 6 months ago or even a year ago. Like, how I feel about writing changes as I write, and it changes through the years. And I've been in discussions or on panels or whatever where someone will say, "Hey, you said this in an interview once," and I'm like, "Did I? Did I say that?"
Yeah.
Because it just changes so frequently. And you and I actually were just discussing about anytime anybody says this is how you do it, I'm immediately suspicious. Right. Because I feel like it's different for everyone, and what works for some people aren't going to work for others. So I feel like right at the top, we can acknowledge like we're speaking from our own experience here, but
this is what helps us, and hopefully it'll help you.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's no one size fits all for a person, but even within each writer, there's no one size fits all, because I find each time I approach a book, it changes. It's different for the book I'm working on right now, like night and day different compared to the way it was, 3 books ago.
Yeah.
So, but I do, as a character first reader, that is the most important thing to me. And I end up finding in my early drafts, and I'm in one right now, and it is true, the first chapter, almost nothing happens because I'm so involved and intensely focused on how do I get this character across to the reader to the point of neglecting everything else. And it's just become part of my process now, I feel like. And I know that eventually I'm going to have to go back and tailor that a little bit more and inject something else. It can't just be this quirky character. But it's the most important thing to me. And so I end up focusing probably an unfair amount of time on it on the front end.
Right.
Is that true of you as well? Yeah. I was going to say, I bet that's true of your work as well.
I usually come up with a premise for a novel, and then I think about who the lead character would be that best serves that premise. And then I spend a long time just getting to know that character, just thinking about who they are. And then the next step for me is when I figure out who they are, I walk through the world looking at the world through their point of view, through their eyes. My main trick is that I have to know their name, I have to know a defining trait, and I have to know their favorite song. So when I say defining trait, it's like, if I know that they're deeply grief-stricken, I know a whole lot about them.
Right.
If I know they're really stingy, I know a whole lot about them. One thing has these ripples that keeps building. And then, if I know their favorite song, I just know so much about the personality and what they care about and things like that. So do you have tricks like that?
Yeah, sometimes it can be a crutch, but sometimes it's helpful to give them a thing, like an item or something, some symbol or token of their life that has been meaningful. I'm with you with the name. I I have I'm nowhere until I have a
Me
name,
too, yeah.
which is so odd. Like, why would that matter? But it
Right.
does. The name just tells you so much about a character, I feel like. And then for me, I feel like probably the most effective characters that I've read, the ones that really stick with me, the common denominator is that they are both specific and surprising.
Mm-hmm.
So they're there's no one else like this person. You know, you read Confederacy of Dunces, and
Mm-hmm.
there's no one
Right.
else like Ignatius J. Riley.
Yeah.
And you know, that's just one of that's the first example I went to, but there's so many where it's just what a specific character. And but it's also like I'm the story I'm working on right now. There is like a 12-year-old and an adult, and the adult has certain expectations when he comes into the orbit of this 12-year-old about what it's going to be like to spend time with this 12-year-old who he barely knows.
Right.
And I I want to run from all of the things that you would expect a 12-year-old to say and do. I feel like that kind of surprising
Right.
elements
Yes.
are what make you think, oh, so like not only does so she doesn't have a phone, but she doesn't want a phone, and here's why. So like you know you would expect, oh, it's unfair because that's not a great example, but it's a more recent. It was the thing I was writing today where I was like, my instinct is to do this, so let me do this
Exactly.
other thing because it's surprising.
Yep.
And how specific can I be so that this character can really kind of stand out that way?
Yes. I tell my students all the time, think about the unexpected.
Mm-hmm.
What's the thing that nobody's expected? And I think a lot about that with language too.
Sure.
But also, yeah, just the reaction and things like that.
Yeah, I mean the goal I've heard frequently in terms of plot, surprising but inevitable. You should the end result of the story was you're shocked, but when you think about it, of course that's how it should have gone.
Right.
And I feel like the same is true of character. A character should feel surprising, but then also inevitable once you get to know them and live in their shoes. Of course they respond
Yes.
these ways and act these ways.
When I'm working with new writers and I tell them to create a character, the main thing they want to focus on is hair color, eye color, clothing, because we think of those things as being specific, but actually they're not specific at all, right? I
Right.
mean, you're sitting in front of me, you have dark hair and brown eyes. So do hundreds of millions of people in the world,
Right.
right? So
Right.
that doesn't tell anybody much about you. What tells people much more about a character is or a person is they're a really sweet person who loves ET.
Right.
I
Right.
mean, some a detail like that,
Yeah.
right, tells you something about their heart. And so the physicality, what I always tell my students is, yeah, physicality matters, but it matters the least when you're
Right.
creating a character. So you agree with that?
I definitely agree with that, and I think the goal for me when I'm describing a character is not to describe what they look like, but describe how they make me feel. And so, oftentimes, I'm unashamed of how much I love metaphors.
Mm-hmm.
And so I will often think, rather than just like you mentioned eyes, rather than describe eye color, when you look at this person's eyes,
Yes.
what does that make you feel?
Right.
And that's going to be such a what a more compelling description. It's going to stick with the reader more and give them a better sense of who this character is instead of just describing the color. And I don't mean comparing the color to something else.
Mm-hmm.
I mean like, in my I'm bringing this up because it is the most recent book. I had described a character having eyes that made it feel like a candle at the bottom of a well.
Mm.
That's a feeling that I get when I look into this person's eyes, and that doesn't really tell you anything about the physical description, the color, but it gives you a sense of who the character is in a way that a physical descriptor never will.
Right. I think our inclination is one thing I see people do a lot is like he was 6 feet tall. I'm like, again, it sounds specific, but it's not specific at all. And so I think what we really need to do is get away from those police report descriptions, right?
Right.
And get more into the operations of a person's heart,
Yeah.
their psyche. When I think about physicality, something that is really important for me, though, is body language. I think that can tell you a whole lot about somebody, how they walk or how they react physically to somebody else, something somebody else says, or, I mean, if a character is sort of walking very, with their shoulders back and their chin up, that's very different than a character who's all slouched over and kind of hiding their face.
Hmm.
I mean, body language can tell you so much. What are some other things that you think about?
Well, I mean, it's funny that you just said that because I'm remembering a time when I was in high school and I took drama my senior year, and I remember feeling I regretted that I hadn't taken it prior because it was so much fun and I really enjoyed it. But I remember my drama teacher. We spent at least one class, maybe more, on character walks,
Mm,
and she showed
right.
us the importance of, well, if you walk like this, what does that tell you?
Hmm.
And if you walk like that, what does that tell? What does that tell the
Right.
audience? And in so many ways, I do feel like writing is a lot like acting, especially with character, because you're really trying to get into character. You're trying to step in the shoes of someone else, and that's what an actor does.
Yes.
And so I think one of the things I used to say a lot, and I kind of said it in a way, was just like, "Oh, this sounds, like something a serious writer would say." And I have since kind of walked it back in a lot of ways, but I also think there is an element of truth to it, which is that once you have found your character, it really does kind of feel more like you're letting them lead you to where they're going,
Right.
and especially if the book is character driven.
Hmm.
So I forget what the question is, but
But you meant
yeah,
what you mean by that is like if you spend the proper amount of time creating the character, then the character sort of creates themselves after a certain point, right?
that's right. And a lot of times, that's where the surprising element of a novel comes in, and we won't get into the whole whether you outline or
Uh
don't
huh.
your novel, but whether you do or not, you're open to the possibility of being surprised. And the way that happens for me, at least, is when a character does or says something that then makes me stop and think, oh, this isn't what I had in mind, or this
Hmm.
isn't what I had planned. But I've spent all this time investing in this character who now feels so real. If they're doing or saying this thing, let me take a minute and investigate what that might mean, and maybe it goes off in a whole other direction. But yeah, maybe that's not a bad thing.
Right. It's interesting that you brought up acting because I think I learned so much more about writing characters in fiction from working with the actors when I had plays produced
Hmm.
and like watching the exercises they did to get into character and to get to know each other and things like that. So that's a tip I give people a lot is, if you can find those acting techniques for creating characters, they're really helpful. We are both cinemaphiles. We both love film. Do you think that your deep knowledge of film has made you a better writer of characters or dialogue or what?
Yeah, I think for sure because um, I was having this conversation with a friend a few years ago who was not a writer of fiction, who was talking about when they read a book, they don't see it played out in their head.
Hmm.
And I was like, well, how do you read
Right.
if you don't see it all? And he was explaining that process, and it was a very linear. He was a STEM guy, and
Hmm.
I'm not trying to obviously, plenty of STEM folks also can see a book in their head as they're reading it, but this is just the kind of person he was. As he was telling me, I was like, it kind of made me realize, oh, okay, so that experience is so different for so many people,
Yeah.
but I definitely do see it all kind of playing out as I'm doing it, and so of course I feel like film then, um, and really TV. I mean, I feel like really good TV is in and of itself
Hmm.
is probably closer to a novel,
Exactly.
than a movie
Yeah.
because of the character development
Right.
over however many hours
Yes.
that you get. So I do think I love that part of my job is watching good film and television.
I'm glad you said
Yeah.
that because, I post a lot like on Twitter or whatever about this film or this TV series or something. And somebody commented at me the other day, like, how do you possibly have this
Yeah.
much time to watch? I'm like, because that's part of my job.
Yeah.
I'm supposed to consume this art
That's right.
because it makes me a better artist.
Yep.
And so I'm always encouraging my students to, take advantage of all the arts.
That's right.
When I'm writing a novel, when I'm creating a character, whatever, I'm looking at films, I'm looking at paintings, photographs, poems, music's a big one,
Yep.
etc. So I think that you got to, writing a novel is such a incredibly hard, long process. You got to do whatever it takes.
That's right.
And so you might as well lean
Yeah.
on art.
Well, in film and television, there's a direct correlation between seeing a beautiful film or watching a compelling TV show, and then you feel that inspiration to go make your own stories.
Right.
There's a direct correlation there. But I love that you brought up music because maybe music it's a little less obvious and a little more indirect of a correlation between music and writing a novel. But yeah, I mean, Elliott Smith is my all-time favorite artist across all mediums. And he taught me that an honest voice is more compelling than a pretty one. And that's something that you can apply to anything that you're making.
That's great.
How can you
Did he say that, or did you translate that from his work?
I translated that.
Yeah.
There are a number of artists that you can debate, well, could they actually sing? And I'm like, well, who cares? Yeah. Is it an honest vulnerability that's like drawing you into the song? And that was what I learned from him was it's what matters the most isn't how perfect or pretty the thing is. It's how vulnerable the thing is and how open is it, and are people drawn to it, and how can you make something that does that and has that effect?
That's great. And I think that word is really important to creating characters. Vulnerability. I think you have to figure out what your character's vulnerability is. It's one reason that I think writing an antagonist or a villain is the hardest thing, because our job is to make characters three-dimensional and human. If you make them three-dimensional or human enough, then they're not bad enough. They're not.
Yeah.
You see them as too human to hate them.
Right.
So, who's your favorite character in literature?
In literature, I don't know that I could just blanket statement say, period, this is my favorite character, but I have been recently reminded of the joys of Samwise Gamgee in Lord of the Rings. I'm introducing my 11-year-old to the movies. He's not at we've read The Hobbit, but the Lord of the Rings is a different beast. But the movies we've been watching, and I am doing my 6th or 7th reread of the series currently. And you want to talk about specific and surprising. I mean, and then not only that, but also just the most loyal companion who's just gonna be there no matter what, and that resonates with me.
That's his defining trait.
That really, loyalty, and I think the statute of limitations on spoilers for Lord of the Rings has long since passed. Yes. But at the end, he's been through this whole journey with his best friend, or at least this person that he now has come to love so dearly, and he realizes he can't carry this person's burden, so he'll just carry the person. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
That's just tears,
right.
And it's funny because I would talk about how Sam Gamgee would make me cry, and my kid would kind of really from Lord of the Rings, and then we watched it. And during that scene, I don't think he would admit it, but I feel like I saw something. I feel like there was something there. It moved him. I'll say that for sure.
Yeah, that's the power.
What about you? Who's your favorite character in literature?
The one that I think is just perfect is Celie from The Color Purple. I just think the way that Alice Walker created her serves the novel so beautifully. And she's so complex, and her defining trait is that she wants to learn, and I love that about her.
Right.
I think there's something really admirable in somebody that wants to learn.
Yeah.
And that is open to learning and has such an open heart. So she's the first one that comes to mind.
Yeah. You said open to learn. That reminded me of the Hamilton song, "Looking for a Mind at Work." But then ultimately, where that came from was this West Wing episode where,
Really?
yeah, because Lin-Manuel is a big West Wing
Hmm.
fan, and but there's a scene where Rob Lowe says something about how before he looks for anything, he looks for a mind at work.
Hmm.
And you're right. There's something compelling about a character who just craves knowledge.
Right. And
like
see, that also illuminates how when you're walking through the world as an artist, everything can feed your art,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yep.
Like you can create something, especially out of another art form, that just because you're listening and looking and, and
Yep.
have your antenna up. One of my favorite writing teachers is Joyce Dyer, and she says that a writer must see, hear, feel, taste, and smell like an animal does. And I love that
Yeah.
because I think that's really important. That's one way to create a great character. If you have all of your senses heightened,
Right.
you're noticing so much stuff about people.
Right.
So, final question. One thing I do, I usually, when I create a character, they're at least one third totally fictional.
Mm-hmm.
They're about one third myself,
Mm-hmm.
and they're about one third somebody I know.
Hmm.
Now, that's not the case with every character, but
Sure.
that's the average, let's say.
Okay.
And I'm just wondering, do you use yourself? Do you use other people, or is it all just fiction, or what?
Yeah.
What's your ratios?
I've never thought about it in terms of ratios like that. But there is some element of truth there, I would say. Although I would say it's more accidental. I'll realize halfway through that I've put myself in a character, or that I've put somebody I know in a character.
Mm-hmm.
Only twice have I put someone I know in a character on purpose. In my third book, the best friend is one of my best friends, and then in my most recent novel, there's a kid who's based on my kid,
Mm-hmm.
and those things
Right.
were intentional on the front end.
Yeah.
I'm putting these people that I know and love
Right.
into a character, and then I don't know, in terms of the secondary characters, I guess it is more about the specific and surprising element. But when it comes to main characters, definitely there have been two books that I've written where I've thought, well, that main character is just me.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's just
Right.
me.
And one thing I mean by that is, like, when I say one third myself, it's usually that I'm thinking, if I was in the situation this character was in, how would I react to that?
Right.
And that's where I come into play, I think, the most,
Yeah.
But I will say there, since it comes up, that I think if you're ever using somebody else in
Mm-hmm.
any way, you must make sure that you're never writing out of a place of malice or revenge.
Sure. Yeah.
Not only will it get you may get you in trouble, but also it doesn't work. It doesn't make for good writing.
I find that anything that you do that comes writing it's such an emptying, giving process. I'm not talking about, I don't mean like, what, I make these books for my readers. I mean the actual process of getting the words onto the page I feel like it's inherently altruistic. It's just, so if there is a mean streak in there, it's going to mess it all up.
Yep, it's toxic.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, that goodness always comes through in your work, and that's why people love your writing and love your characters. So thank you for being with us.
I'm honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
Writing Lessons is an initiative of the 2023-2025 Kentucky Poet Laureate. That's me, Silas House. I am thankful for the support of the Kentucky Arts Council, the Carnegie Center for Literacy and Learning, the Office of Governor Andy Beshear, and Kentucky Humanities. This show is written, recorded, edited, and produced by me. I hope you'll share the show with other writers, students, or anyone who is interested in the creative process. Please subscribe to our show, and if you like it, I hope you'll leave a review or a 5-star rating. That will help us get the show to more people. Thanks so much for listening to Writing Lessons.